It was a cold, gray afternoon in Washington, D.C. on March the 17th, 2025, when the first crack appeared in the carefully constructed facade of the Biden administration's final years. The Department of Justice, a hulking monolith of bureaucracy, stood quiet under a drizzle that blurred the city's edges. Inside, in a windowless office on the fourth floor, Pam Bondi, Florida's former Attorney General, and now a key figure in the DOJ's Oversight Division, stood beside a steel cabinet, her fingers tracing the edges of a folder so thick it could have doubled as a blunt weapon. Across the room, James Comer, the relentless Kentucky congressman and chairman of the House Oversight Committee, leaned against a conference table, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on Bondi. He didn't need to ask what she'd found. He already knew, but he wanted to hear her say it. 42 documents, Bondi muttered, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the hum of the office's fluorescent lights. Executive orders, immigration directives, mass clemency grants, economic reallocation orders, all bearing the exact same signature pattern. She flipped open the folder, revealing a stack of papers, each stamped with a signature that looked too perfect, too uniform. Every single one of them produced by an Autopen. Not a single fingerprint, no variation in pressure, just ink on command. Kamir raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of grim satisfaction and barely concealed fury. "And the timing?" he asked, though the question was more a prompt than a query. Bondi didn't look up from the documents. 13 were issued while Biden was hospitalized, 4 during what they called a brief health episode, when he was resting at Camp David. But my personal favorite? She pulled out a single sheet, holding it up like a trophy. October 3rd, 2023, the G7 summit in Italy. Biden wasn't in a briefing room. He wasn't in a meeting. He was wandering off, staring at parachutes like a kid at a county fair, while Georgia Maloney had to guide him back to the group like a nurse escorting a patient. Comer's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "And he signed a parole expansion that day, didn't he?" Bondi nodded, her eyes narrowing. Approved 525,000 fast-track entries from 4 countries: Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. Full package, work permits, ID cards, access to benefits, the whole deal. Signed, sealed, delivered, while the man himself couldn't find his way back to a podium. Comer let out a short, bitter breath, the kind that comes when you've been vindicated, but the truth tastes like ash. The man wasn't even present mentally, but that pen was working overtime. Bondi dropped the file onto the table with a thud. "This isn't neglect, James. This is fraud. These weren't just rubber-stamped. They were pre-planned, processed, and pushed through with a machine while the country was told he was resting. Someone was using his name while he wasn't competent. And I don't mean that in the abstract. I mean someone committed a federal crime using presidential authority." Comer picked up one of the sheets, holding it to the light. The signature was pristine, mechanical, devoid of the human imperfections that betray a real hand. "No fingerprint, no pressure on the paper," he said almost to himself. "Just ink on command." Bondi's voice dropped, sharper now, like a blade finding its mark. "Either we had a ghost president or someone was running things behind the curtain, and we both know who was closer to the Oval Office than any chief of staff." Comer's eyes met hers. He didn't need to say the name. Neither did she. Jill Biden, The First Lady who wasn't just standing by her husband, but, it seemed, steering the ship while he faded into the background. Comer flipped through his notes, his jaw tight. Autopen signatures, a missing president, full executive authority being exercised by someone else, he muttered. If Biden wasn't signing and he wasn't lucid, then someone was giving the orders. He paused, then picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Get me O'Connor," he said, his voice clipped. The call was to Dr. Kevin O'Connor, the White House physician who had been Joe Biden's personal doctor for years. If anyone knew the truth about the president's condition, it was him. 2 weeks later, in a windowless room inside the House Oversight Committee's secure offices, Dr. O'Connor sat across from Comer, gripping the edge of his chair as if it might anchor him to reality. His tie was neat, but his shirt was wrinkled, and his hands twitched just slightly, betraying a man who hadn't slept soundly in months. Comer leaned forward, his voice calm but direct. "You understand this is off the record for now, Doctor. You're not under oath, but depending on your answers, this will become a matter of federal interest." O'Connor nodded, too quickly, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. Comer folded his hands. "Did you ever submit a request to evaluate President Biden's cognitive ability during his term?" The answer came faster than expected. "Yes," O'Connor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "3 times. Once after the 'Where's Jackie?' incident in 2022, when he asked for a deceased congresswoman in public. Once after the chair confusion on stage in Detroit, when he seemed disoriented by his own surroundings. And once after the G7 summit in 2023, when he lost his place and Georgia Maloney had to guide him back to the group. Comer leaned back slowly, letting the weight of the words settle. "You're saying you formally requested evaluations?" O'Connor swallowed hard. "Written memos, internal, through the White House Medical Office." "And who responded?" Comer asked, his tone unchanging. Silence. O'Connor's eyes dropped to the table. "I didn't get a response. I got visits." "From who?" Comer pressed. O'Connor looked up, his expression dead serious. "Jill Biden, twice directly, once through her chief of staff. After that, access changed. I wasn't allowed in the West Wing without pre-approval. For almost 3 weeks, I didn't see the president at all." Comer didn't interrupt, but his silence was louder than any question. O'Connor shifted, his voice quickening as if trying to outrun his own words. "I'm not saying she gave orders in public, but every instruction about his schedule, his medications, his visibility, it came through her." Comer's voice came low, deliberate. "If the president isn't managing his doctor, and the doctor's being managed by his wife, then tell me, Doc, who's really running the country?" O'Connor didn't answer. He didn't need to. Comer had already written it in his notes. Jill Biden, operational gatekeeper. Physician control means executive control. The investigation had just grown a second head, and its name wasn't Joe. The whispers started to spread, quiet at first, like ripples in a pond. By late March, they were waves crashing against the walls of the Biden administration's carefully curated image. Comer's meeting with O'Connor hadn't stayed secret for long. Word leaked that Jill Biden wasn't just reading briefing notes, she was writing them. She wasn't just protecting her husband. She was guarding access to policy, to power, to the illusion that the man in the Oval Office was still the man in charge. The media, predictably, panicked. The left's go-to strategy when the heat closed in was always the same: a full-blown PR resuscitation, broadcast in high definition, delivered by the same outlets that had spent 2 years gaslighting America about Biden's fitness. On March 28, 2025, MSNBC aired a special sit-down between Andrea Mitchell and Jill Biden. They called it intimate, candid, historic. Pam Bondi, watching from her DOJ office, called it something else: a liability statement with lipstick. "Joe's tired," Jill said on air, her voice gentle, her hands folded like she was reading a bedtime story to a nation of children. "But we lead together. We always have. I protect him, and I protect this country." Bondi didn't bother muting the TV. "Lead together?" she said aloud, flipping through a transcript of the interview. "The man can't finish a sentence without cue cards. She's not protecting him. She's running the whole damn show." The media blitz didn't stop there. Jake Tapper, the CNN anchor who had spent years defending Biden's mental acuity and dismissing critics as conspiracy theorists, suddenly released a memoir titled Unmasked: The Crisis No One Wanted to See. The subtitle: Worse Than Watergate. Bondi nearly choked on her coffee when she saw it. "Jake Tapper turning on Biden?" she muttered to her staff. "That's not a conscience. That's a rat looking for dry land." Comer had his own thoughts. "Let me get this straight," he told a reporter that afternoon. "You spend 2 years calling us nuts, then write a book pretending you were the one who figured it out. Please." The only thing he figured out was his severance package. Tapper wasn't alone in jumping ship. Karine Jean-Pierre, Biden's former press secretary, had quietly auditioned for a spot on The View. Word got out fast that the producers passed, not because of politics, but because, as one staffer put it, "there's nothing going on upstairs." As CNN laid off another round of producers and MSNBC went dark on a Tuesday slot, it became clear the ship was sinking, and Jill Biden was still pretending she had the wheel. Then came the leak. A former White House digital aide dropped a video on a small independent blog. Within hours, it was everywhere: shared, retweeted, amplified across platforms. The footage showed Jill Biden in a side office at the Biden Institute, sitting with two senior staffers, redlining a document labeled Draft Executive Memo, Cuba Parole Extension. Joe Biden was nowhere in sight. The aide captioned the video simply, "There was no acting president, just Jill." Comer didn't wait for permission. "She's not the first lady anymore," he said flatly during a committee briefing. "She's not even a proxy, she's a hijacker. We've got unelected power, unauthorized edits, and a president wheeled around like a prop." Bondi had the clip verified by DOJ tech teams within 48 hours and forwarded it to the Oversight Committee. Then she looked up at her staff and said what everyone was thinking: "The facade is cracking, and the person behind the curtain, she's not Dorothy. She's the damn wizard." That was the point of no return. Jill had crossed the line from surrogate to operator, from spouse to shadow executive. The evidence was no longer whispers and innuendo. It was paper, footage, signatures. The mask had slipped, and they were about to rip it off live and on record. But Jill Biden wasn't one to retreat. When people like her, those who've held power without ever earning it, feel that power slipping, they don't back down. They double down. They don't recalibrate. They stage a pageant. And so she did what all desperate authoritarians do when their myth starts to crumble. She built a shrine. The email blast went out on April 10th, 2025, under the title A President's Heart, honoring the human legacy of Joe Biden. Sent from the Biden Institute at the University of Delaware, it advertised a televised commemoration of mercy, a symbolic event where President Biden would reaffirm, live and on camera, the now infamous 2023 mass clemency order. The same order issued while he was supposedly resting, the same one typed, formatted, and signed by a machine. This time, Jill wasn't hiding behind closed doors. She was taking center stage. The main atrium of the Biden Institute had been transformed to resemble the East Room of the White House. Faux columns, golden drapes, a podium, cameras, donors in folding chairs, and rows of invited press. MSNBC had exclusive broadcast rights, and front and center stood Jill Biden, the symbol herself, in a crisp cream jacket, one hand on the lectern, the other holding a folder thick with myth-making. Seated beside her was Joe Biden, wheelchaired, sunglasses on, his face blank, his head drooped slightly forward. He blinked slowly, as if someone had turned down the refresh rate on his mind. He hadn't spoken all morning. Jill smiled into the lens. "He's no longer in the White House," she began, her voice steady, "but he has never left the heart of this nation. Today we honor one of his most compassionate acts, the pardoning of 8,000 Americans whose lives were given a second chance because this man, my husband, never gave up on them." She opened the folder slowly, lifting a single sheet of paper, large font, decorative border, the title in bold, Presidential Reaffirmation, Clemency Order 8000B. "This," she said, holding it up, "is the signature of empathy." A staffer stepped forward, carefully placing a pen in Joe's hand. The room went quiet. Biden looked at the paper. He stared. 1 second, 2, 10, 17 full seconds of frozen silence. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't respond. A reporter from the back broke the stillness. "Mr. President, do you confirm this is your decision?" Joe turned his head slightly, the corners of his mouth twitching into a soft grin, like someone who'd woken up in the wrong room. He muttered something. No microphone picked it up. The pen slipped from his fingers. Jill moved instantly, picking it up, pressing it gently into his palm, and guiding his hand to the page. "He doesn't have to speak," she said, eyes fixed on the cameras. "The signature is enough." Then with practiced grace, she leaned down and whispered, "We sign with heart. We don't need words." The cameras caught it all, but what they didn't catch, at least not on air, was what came next. Backstage, long after the applause had died, after the chairs were cleared and the feeds shut off, one of Jill's top aides forgot to mute a handheld mic. A camera meant to capture behind-the-scenes footage for a future PBS documentary kept recording. In that frame, Jill Biden, no script, no filter, turned to her closest handler and said, "I'm not letting them tear down what we built. We saved them. They owe us. And I don't care what Trump's DOJ tries to drag up. Those people in Havana, in Caracas, in Port-au-Prince, they hold information that could level campaigns. This signature, it's our insurance." The clip wasn't uploaded by accident. It was handed directly to James Comer's office. 2 days later, it landed on Pam Bondi's desk. She watched it once, then again, then a third time. "Hold the footage," she told Comer over the phone. "We're not dropping this in the press. We wait." "For what?" Comer asked, his voice calm but curious. "For the moment she says it's all lies," Bondi replied, her tone icy. And then we make her eat those words under oath. The stage was set. They wouldn't indict her in the media. They'd do it live, before the nation. The curtain hadn't dropped yet. But when it did, Jill Biden wouldn't be waving. She'd be cornered, out of lines to read. On April 25th, 2025, the House Oversight Committee chamber was packed, cameras streaming live. Jill Biden sat rigidly, Joe beside her, pale and vacant. Pam Bondi, calm and precise, presented 42 executive actions from 2023 to 2025, all signed by an Autopen, not Joe Biden. She cited 8,000 pardons, a parole expansion for 525,000 foreigners, and a multi-billion-dollar USAID transfer, all without presidential logs. James Comer revealed the Autopen was at the Biden Institute, not the White House, used when Joe was incapacitated. Footage showed Biden disoriented at the 2023 G7 summit. Bondi asked, if Joe wasn't deciding, who was? Jill insisted she only supported Joe, calling it duty, not deception. Comer played Dr. O'Connor's testimony, claiming Jill barred cognitive evaluations. Jill denied it, but footage from April 17th showed her guiding Joe's hand to sign pardons. A leaked clip revealed her saying, "He doesn't need to understand. The signature's enough." Comer accused her of running a political machine. Trump ordered her arrest for unauthorized executive power. Silence fell as Jill stood frozen, Joe unmoving. A dynasty collapsed with a signature.